Then everybody is done.
We could just send it over, and we could just send it over to CCOM. They can, you guys can put it right here. We hand off to the team.
See? See, I know.
The plan was in place a long time ago. We just,
yeah.
so anyways, if he's interested, we can get into it.
Well, I think we should, because we're willing to partner somehow. I mean, we're not going to come up with a lot of funding and stuff, but you know, the infrastructure is there already. We have it there, and that was the thing with CCOM, you know, that they can do some attachments with us and it move it around.
Really, right now, they're calling it.
Do you know what the charge is?
I think they're 250 a piece, but they're probably so I bet you probably half. You guys are
Yeah, and that's the thing that is, you know, your company couldn't do anything, can't touch our meters, we would have to do all of that.
We would have to install it.
Right.
And then we then have the external
Do the pigtail.
Yep, we would get a pigtail and pull it to the pigtail. And the pigtail's inside the lock so that the customer can get to it. So we got to these metal conduit goes between the meter and our box.
Yeah, see, those are things that we're, you know, we're like, we're nonprofit. What we're all about is our membership, and whatever we can do to make their lives better, that's what we're trying to do. You know, so partnering with other companies, that's what we need to do. So let me, I'm going to. And then I'm on top of Dennis, our chief operations officer. And we need to, you know, that would be a good start.
What?
That would be just like, you know, one of those pilot projects to start in a small area and then.
Yeah, and we built our network in areas. So we broke it down. We have 14 areas. So we could really just to trial on one area. We could tell you this area there's 70 homes. This is the cost for this area. This is the cost for this area. This is the cost for this area. That way we could lay it out for 2 years, 3 years, 5 years.
Sure.
And that way we can see the big picture. And then here's the thing that drives us down to put out more fires.
Oh, yeah.
We have a service on the end of it.
Exactly.
You
And
guys
you'll
are
know
all
how
on truck, send us all. You can do all that. Send us all.
Yeah. Awesome. It does. Sounds very good. Very good.
Great.
Let me do that. Take it back to the people.
Take it back to the decision makers.
Yeah, those people.
Yeah, those
you know?
people. I call my candidates.
Uh-huh. Yes. Oh, yeah.
Hey, Megan, is there a way that I can get on just to show her something? Do I have your network? That's it?
Yeah. You know,
Okay.
So it was like a private network. Yeah, HDI.
Just tourism? Yeah. And then security's done? Yeah. Okay. Okay.
No. So we should.
Okay.
when we come through.
Should I make the assumption?
Yeah, we. Yes.
I think there's something that comes to having medical clinic is on the program.
I can't answer that question, but I can.
Second question is,
You were upset last time we talked.
I'm always upset, I was born out. So I get more done now.
To the folks in the flag, can see too.
Yes.
Yeah.
We should.
I have insinuated that the way I know how that I want alternatives.
Okay. I'll play standing here because there's for the presentation, a lot of transitions and stuff.
I'm guessing they're listening in and so trying to be careful,
Okay.
but it's not good for Colorado.
All right, well, I think we're gonna get going. We'll do some, hopefully we can get here a little early. We'll do some quick presentations and then give OIT update.
They say that, you know, they've got 3 key ones together.
I agree, it's totally. Just realize that it's a lag time.
Brand.
Why not take something? Right. It's been 2 years since we were made aware of the issue. Okay. They're living under your funds.
Where is
Northwest. Highway 69. Right up here on your way.
it's foundational.
Yeah. All right, okay, so, for the rest of the session, what I want to do is just kind of give, gonna give a quick presentation on the FirstNet initiative, which hopefully you'll see the overlap of what we're doing. And then going to kind of get into some general updates on the broadband fund, our distance learning, and the other relevant issues I think everyone will find interesting. So I know some of you guys have seen this presentation on the FirstNet stuff, so sorry for repetition, but just to give a quick overview. FirstNet, the FirstNet initiative is really a nationwide effort to build a 4G wireless broadband network for public safety. As some of you know, some of you may not know, right now, public safety, the radios you see on most of their hips, that's all proprietary information. One agency may or may not be able to talk to another agency. We're pretty good in our state about what's called interoperability, but there's still a lot of issues. So this is the movement to really say, let's hit the next step. And, rather than those radios that can do one thing and do it very well, let's put the same kind of power into smartphones. More and more public safety folks, first responders, they need smartphones, they need data. And so this effort is really a nationwide movement to basically create a network nationwide so that it doesn't matter where you go, just like it doesn't matter where you go with your cell phone, it just works. And that's really what we want to do for our first responders. And so what we've got here is a quick little video to kind of show everyone where's play? Is that play? Kind of give a background. Let's see, is that no? Hopefully we can do the video here. Where's play? Okay, hold on a sec. Should be here somewhere. No, next we'll take it to the...
For the emergency medical technician in the field, information is power. Your patients depend on you to deliver the best pre-hospital care. You need access to reliable communications at all times to coordinate with other first responders at the scene and with medical personnel at the hospital. The First Responder Network Authority, or FirstNet, is building a broadband communications network that will give you the connectivity you need for the wireless telemedicine support of community paramedicine. FirstNet will put the most advanced technologies at your fingertips. It will give EMS providers a reliable broadband connection.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, Megan.
That will enable them to transmit and receive life-saving medical information. FirstNet connects you to your partners in other jurisdictions. Whether communicating during a multi-agency incident or sending videos or photos of injured or sick patients to doctors waiting to treat them, FirstNet will bring emergency responders together in an unprecedented way. First responders need the very best tools we can put in their hands. First responders need FirstNet. Find out more at www.firstnet.gov.
So that video obviously focused on emergency medical services. They've got one, some for law enforcement, for fire. But essentially, it's really bringing the power of data and wireless communications to first responders. And so what we're looking at is really, these slides not, I don't know if our screen share is messing us up or what.
Should I go on?
What? No, it's not you, Ed. It's, I think it's, oh, there we go. But basically, what it is, as I said, it's a 4G wireless LTE network. So think Verizon or AT&T just for first responders. So you and I as citizens will not have access to this network. It's just going to be for first responders, and then we'll get the secondary responders as well. One of the things in my past life, I've worked on this when I first got going about 5-6 years ago. I used to argue when I was at a dispatch center that if there's a blizzard, that snowplow suddenly becomes a first responder. I can't get an ambulance to someone's house in 2 feet of snow unless I plow the road. So those types of issues, the secondary responders will be using this as well. But just to kind of drive this home, I think we use this in our presentation. If you look at this, this is from Pope Benedict's debut 2005. A lot of folks out there, you can see a flip phone, which is pretty unique. So flash forward 7 years, look at that. All right, so that's we use this to really emphasize the power of what data has become and the amount of devices. And really, first responders are no different. I think, again, if you ask most of them, they carry a cell phone, and some of you use a cell phone rather than a radio because they can do more. There's an app right now that came out. I was talking to a firefighter, I think it's in New York, made an app, with all the electrical cars now. If they have to saw a car in half, you do not want to hit one of those key power lines where the battery is feeding the engine, or you're going to get a big surprise. So they now have an app where they can take a picture of a car and upload it, and then it'll download immediately the schematics of that car, whether it's a Tesla or a Prius, and show them where the key electrical points are, so that they don't cut through one of the main electrical lines and hurt themselves doing that. So it's just little things like that that, first responders are not getting access to, that we need data for. And so the problem that we run into is that, data's everywhere. You and I use data. Ed's sitting here on his laptop, while he's multitasking. The problem is it's really not here where we need it. And the reason it's not here where we need it in catastrophic events is that in most things, the commercial networks are the first thing to go down. Hurricane Sandy, commercial networks went down within 45 minutes. My counterpart in Washington, the state of Washington, likes to go to me a lot. And he says, back last February, we had this big parade in Seattle after this game. And he said, that was interesting, all the networks crashed for 2 hours. People couldn't call 911. All their first responders were dead in the water with their cell phone. Because right now, first responders use commercial networks. And so that's really one of the problems we have, is that in these incidents, when we really need data, we really need to communicate from a first responder perspective, the networks are gone. Other thing, some of the towers, there's certain grades of towers. A lot of the towers that the commercial networks are built on, just because of economies, don't meet minimum standards. This is obviously an extreme case, but one of the things that this network will be built to is certain standards that say what public safety grade. Towers are hardened, they can withstand hurricane force winds, all these kind of things. Again, making sure the network is up when we need it the most. And the other thing is devices. I think, you and I kind of got our devices. I think Nate, the volunteer fireman, if he's still on, I can attest that, first responders are not necessarily the most gentle folks with technology. And so, we got to figure out how can we make some hardened devices. And we're starting to see some of these already on the market as well. So just to kind of get an idea of what we're looking at, hopefully this audio works.
It's out of West Fire. The West Fertilizer is one of their mills is on fire. There's heavy smoke coming out of the top of it. I was just about to do that. West Fire, West Fire. Needs to respond to West Fertilizer plant. They have a fire out there again. West Fire out to West Fertilizer plant.
Okay, so this is what most first responders get. It's basically dispatch getting a call from someone, you or I, saying, calling on the phone, relaying information. This is what, this event sounded like. Well, this is what this event actually was. Yeah. Oh, you okay? I'm sure So now, do you think the dispatcher would have said things a little bit differently if they had that picture, an image, or the officer going to there? Two really different stories. It's kind of on fire. No, it blew up the entire town. So these are the kind of things that we need, that first responders need. So it helps us to have that. When you're looking at the data, they can have as well. All right, so here's a pre-planned thing. Here's an explosion. They know exactly where the radius is. They can pre-plan these things and go out there and say, okay, we know which zone is going to be impactful, where we can go, where we can't go. Holy cow, there's a middle school right next to there. Let's get in there. Let's see what's going on. This types of information is what first responders need to really do their jobs well. Data safety sheets. Okay, what the heck was in that fertilizer plant? What kind of chemicals are we looking at? What's the danger here? What do we have to deal with? All this information needs to be there quickly and reliably. And you can imagine if there was a cell phone tower or something next to that fertilizer plant, it was probably gone. Or the commercial networks in that area were probably swamped from everyone trying to call each other. So these are the things we're trying to figure out with FirstNet and really build at a national level. Again, just more examples of pre-planned incidents that we can use in trying to figure out what to do. All right. Okay, so kind of said this a bit, myth. A lot of folks think that public safety has a mission critical system, just like the radios they have. It's proprietary, it's hardened, never goes down. Well, as I said, that's not the truth. They really, right now, we use the commercial networks. On a day-to-day basis, usually that's fine. Public safety doesn't actually use a whole lot of data on a day-to-day basis. The commercial networks are fine. It's when we see these events. It's really these big events. It's also rural coverage. Obviously, we just talked about rural coverage in rural Colorado. It doesn't make business sense for a lot of wireless carriers to come out in the rural part of Colorado. Well, we still have incidents in rural part of Colorado. We still have search and rescue folks trying to get people off the ledge. We still have issues, at the ranch where a first responder needs to come out a fertilizer explosion or an incident with a tractor on a ranch where we need that data. So, you know, really, there's several issues that constitute us needing this network. So this is what commercial carriers sell often. I think, you know, basically the information superhighway. From a public safety perspective, this is what we get a lot of times. And there's our ambulance. You know, again, when you talk about you know, the Seattle issue or Hurricane Sandy or Katrina, you know, everyone else is trying to get out of the street. Well, first responders are the ones going in. Everyone's kind of trying to get out with their bandwidth, and we need to get in with our bandwidth. We're not going to, you know, nothing we can do. And the other thing is, commercial carriers they don't prioritize their network. It's just, again, it's not in their business model. It doesn't make sense for them to do this. So the main challenges we have from a public safety perspective in urban areas, it's really bandwidth. You know, it's you know, again, in my last life, you know, we were trying to push out a lot of things over the air to our deputies and our fire folks, but we couldn't because we just didn't have the bandwidth. You know, we had some connection, but we just didn't have that bandwidth to start to do streaming video, to do high definition data sheets going back and forth, to do complex data queries. You know, when you're searching for a suspect and you're searching a huge massive data warehouse and getting back, you know, videos and all that kind of good stuff. We just couldn't do that. So really in urban areas, it's the idea of bandwidth that we're competing against, you know, the little kid uploading their cat video, or, you know, you taking a picture at your kid's soccer game. That's what public safety is competing against. So that's our challenge. In the rural part, in the wilderness area, again, it's coverage. It's because it doesn't make sense for the carriers to cover, you know, part of the state. There's parts of this state that the private carriers will never cover. I mean, it's not their fault. It just doesn't make business sense to do it. But again, we have incidents out from public safety perspective that we need to cover. So this, for those that don't know, the land mobile radio, again, that's the radio on your hip that you see on their hip. Those are still here to stay, because one of the issues is what's called mission critical voice. Those things work. You know, this technology, the cellular technology, is something we have all experienced. You drop a call, you can't quite get the call. It's kind of, you know, it's kind of fuzzy. You know, first responders can't deal with that with voice. So, you know, any of you folks that are, you know, involved with those decisions about land mobile radio at a local level and so forth, it's still very much needed, because this is a very new technology. Someday this might replace that land mobile radio, but that's a ways away. So we still have to make investments in both. And this is just an idea of some of the things that will, you know, that we can start doing. Real-time video, remote fingerprinting. You know, I think everyone knows a lot of stuff on connected to fingerprinting. You know, officers can do fingerprints right out in the field. Sensors, biometrics. You know, as the video showed in the EMS world. You know, being able to really have real-time videos as you're taking a patient, you know, back to the hospital, especially in a place like this, where someone could have an hour ambulance ride before they can even get to the clinic. Well, with this network, we can basically have high-def video cameras so that an emergency surgeon in Pueblo could be looking at that patient as they're being transported to Pueblo, you know, from the mountains, you know, getting real-time vitals and really helping the paramedics keep that person stable and giving them the best chance they have to live. You know, there's what's called the golden hour. Basically, the first hour after someone's injured really dictates whether they live or not when there's a critical injury. So the more we can give the field folks the tools to do that, the better off that person's going to be. So these are the coverage categories we're looking at. When you look at it, it's kind of crazy. And this is nationwide. So across the entire nation, 5% of the land mass is suburban, urban, and dense urban. It's pretty crazy. When you look at our state, even 95% of our population live in 1.5% of the land mass of the state. So that, you know, that's a big challenge. And then when you look at the rural and the wilderness, well, in our state, it's even more. You know, obviously, over a third of our land is federal land, which is all considered wilderness. So we've got some big challenges to deal with, knowing that obviously, you know, if the commercial carriers can't do this, there's a reason they can't do it, because it's really hard and it's really expensive. So what this model is going to be, FirstNet is essentially an independent authority of the NTIA, the National Telecommunications and Information Association administration. And they were funded, I'll get this in a minute, with a large chunk of money from Spectrum Auctions. And the idea here is that this entity is actually going to build this network in partnership with both local entities and commercial carriers in a public-private partnership, and basically become, you know, a carrier for public safety. So as I said, public safety entities right now write a check to Verizon or AT&T or Sprint or T-Mobile every month for all their data devices. Well, now they just write that check to FirstNet and essentially pay for the service they get. So who are we talking about with first responders? This is just an idea. These are just first-line first responders. looking at 5.5 million people nationwide. This is part of the reason why we're looking to expand it to transportation, public works, those kind of things. Because 5.5 million people can't sustain a network like this with user fees. We've got to have more folks. So that's one of the things we're looking into the secondary responders. Colorado, we're really in a unique opportunity. The first pilot project of this in the entire country will be live at the end of this year in Adams County. That's actually the project I started on about 5 years ago. So we literally will be the first one. They cover all of Adams County with this network. It's going to be really great to see that happen. So we'll start to see first responders actually use this network by the end of the year here in Colorado. Up in Boulder, the FirstNet technical headquarters, all the folks designing this network, as well as the folks doing all the R&D on this stuff are in Boulder. Great advantage to have those folks up the road. We've got a lot of extensive infrastructure, as we talked about. A lot of the efforts we're working on right now, we could leverage this, because one of the reasons they're looking to do public-private partnership is we can't build out the network for the budget we have. So what we got to do is use existing infrastructure. Let's not build a new tower. Let's go find a tower and just use it. Let's put a tower on top of a school, on top of a government building. Let's use assets that we have. And we've done some, as I said, we've done some good things statewide with public safety communications. So we're kind of a little bit ahead of the curve. What are we doing in our state? We put together a collaborative multidisciplinary governing body, basically representative from every discipline. County sheriffs, police chiefs, fire chiefs, EMS folks, CCI, CML, the state, all the different levels of government. And I'm sorry.
DLC is.
Department of Corrections, well, they're part of the state. So there's 2 representatives from the state is on there. There's healthcare right now, MSAC, which is the Emergency Medical Services. We're looking to put CDPHE on there as well from a more statewide perspective. So really having everyone that's going to be using this network involved in making the decision. So they guide myself and 2 folks, Ed and Kim, you might have met, basically doing what Megan's doing, but on the public safety side, they kind of give us our feedback and give us the direction of what we're going. So what's our timeline? We're right now, we're in the outreach, and we're hopefully going to be in the data collection process soon, what's called the state consultation process. What happens with this is basically we work with this first entity over the next year, year and a half, to put together a state plan. It says this is what the coverage is going to look like for Colorado. Here's the model, here's the financial model, here's everything. And then FirstNet will go out and do an RFP and select a partner to build this network with. And they'll present that plan to the governor. At that point, the governor has the chance to say, yes, this is a great plan, we like this network, we're in. Or we can say, no, we think we can do better. The problem is, if we say we can do better, we got to pay for it. So, the likelihood of that happening is pretty slim, because, imagine the cost to build a wireless network across this whole state is a lot of money. And the last time I checked, most counties and cities in the state don't have a lot of money right now, just sitting around. So, our goal is to opt into this network. And so really what we're ideally 2 to 3 years, we'll see this network go live in the state, at least in part of it. It's going to take some time to build this thing. So what's next? We're working on developing specific coverage models for every county. We have an RFP out right now. We're about to go out to have someone come in and help us to say, work with public safety in every single county and say, what would it take for you guys to use this network? In a lot of the rural areas, it's kind of ironic. But in a lot of areas, we know public safety doesn't use data right now because they can't rely on it. I know that in Otero County, the sheriff, former sheriff of Otero County said, I won't use this because I don't use data because I can't rely on it. So that's going to be one of our questions is what would it take for you to rely on this network? What kind of coverage, what kind of capacity, what kind of availability would you rely on this thing to use it? So we're going to go county by county and work with the county public safety folks and local officials to develop from the ground up. We're also going to be developing use cases and scenarios, using agencies, understanding where events are. As I said, just because you might have a populated urban center doesn't mean you may not have a lot of events outside in the outskirts. We need to understand that so we know where to build the network. Because the fact is, there are going to be parts of the state we can never, ever cover. That's just a fact of life with this state. And so that's what we wanted to identify is where do we need to put our efforts into cover. Synchronizing our efforts with groups like this. Basically, both FirstNet and our LTPTs in this efforts are managed out of our group. As I said, there's another couple folks that work with Megan and I focusing on this. So we are looking at these in tandem. We've even had, I know Commissioner Steen has even mentioned in Teller County saying, hey, let's make this one effort. Because if we're coming in here and looking at all this infrastructure for public safety, obviously we can use that infrastructure for commercial and getting broadband to our county as well. He's absolutely right. I think Dale has done the same thing, wants to do the same thing in Custer County. So we're open to kind of partnering. The one thing we're crystal clear on is public safety will drive this back. This is public safety's network, and they're going to drive the needs and the requirements of this. That said, we realize there's, obviously counties and cities usually pay the bills for public safety, so there needs to be some communication. We're leaving that up to the specific counties, but we are open to really kind of combining these efforts, and I think you'll see them combined a little more often. One of the great things, as I said, is there's potential for new infrastructure in rural parts of Colorado, because that's one of the federal statute that started this whole thing said there has to be significant rural coverage. Now, they didn't say what significant is. They just came out with that. They're starting to ask us, what does that mean? But one of their main goals is to cover the rural parts of the area, of the country. And so really when in terms of looking at what you guys can do is just continue to work with your local public safety stakeholders. If you haven't been, go introduce yourselves to them, get in touch with them, because there's a lot of overlap with this. But this is kind of a new way of business for public safety, so they may not be used to doing things collaboratively like this. So we encourage you guys to reach out to those folks. So we have a website up. It's a great website, firstnetcolorado.org. Should give you all the background and the history. It'll link you to the National FirstNet website to understand this. So if you spend some time on this website, you should have a pretty good idea of what the heck we are talking about. And for contacts, these are, as I said, Kim and Ed are the primary outreach and program managers for this, and obviously myself. So please feel free to contact us with anything at all. So that was a really, really fast overview of something that's been 10 years in the making, 12 years in the making, actually. So any questions on this initiative? Just wanted you guys to get a brief overview. I know some of you folks have seen this, but just to understand what the other big thing that we're working on right now within OIC in our office or school department. Any questions?
I have just a comment.
Yes.
You're working with partners and looking for partners for this.
Yes.
The Transportation Test Center under the American Association of Railroads
Okay.
does a training every year for first responders throughout the nation.
Okay.
They may be a good contact for you as far as asking who they work with and who are partners.
Yeah, that would be good, because I know at a federal level there's some efforts to coordinate the federal levels together, but that's good to know.
They're out of Pueblo.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I have a contact there if you'd like me to forward that
That'd be-
information to you.
That'd be fantastic.
Because
Yes.
he's the one that helps organize that and get that all put together.
Yeah, that's what
Over
we're.
2,000 first responders come to Pueblo every summer
Yep.
for that training.
Okay.
Might be good to help.
Well, that's fantastic.
Who will own the network? Who will operate it?
FirstNet. So the question is, who will own and operate the network? That is the mandate. So the statute that created this whole thing, it basically gives FirstNet the mandate to build. What's the exact language? Own, operate, and maintain the FirstNet network. So
Quasi-governmental organization.
quasi-governmental. There's a national, and I don't know why I believe the slide. There's a slide I talked about this. I just realized. But basically, the FirstNet entity itself is a national entity. There's a board of directors, 16 folks from public safety, from industry, from federal government, from state government, from local government. They just kind of reshuffled the board a little bit. There's about 4 or 5 retired telecom execs on there, anywhere from some folks that the old Verizon lineage. There's some folks I think with Sprint and connections there, Metro PCS connections there. Essentially folks that have built wireless networks for a long time on the commercial side. There's see here, the police chief of Salt Lake is on there. There's a rural sheriff from, I want to say, Minnesota on there. Jeff Johnson, retired fire chief from Oregon, is on there. So it's really a cross section of stakeholders. There are others, board of directors. Now there is also an operational entity. So there's a general manager for FirstNet. So it's actually a functional organization. There's a CTO, there's a CFO, there's a COO. But essentially the group reports to this board. The board is responsible for giving a yearly update to Congress. And to be honest, that whole, how do they fit? How much autonomy do they have? They're still kind of, I know FirstNet is trying to say, no, we want to operate independently, more like a private company. And there's some folks that say, no, we're still, you're still government. So they're kind of trying to figure out what that balance between, are you government or are you not government? Yes. But yeah, but eventually, if everything goes according to plan, like I said, folks at the entities that choose to use this, and I want to focus that no one's mandated to use this. It'll always be the choice of the local public safety entity to say, we want to use this network, but they would write their check to FirstNet, just like they write their check to Verizon or AT&T right now. So that's the goal. I mean, that's been the goal all along, is to say, if you're paying $50 a month per device to, AT&T, then, if we come in and say, well, we're going to charge you $100 a month, you're probably not going to use that. Maybe if maybe you can say, we'll charge you a few bucks more because it's better coverage. But yeah, that's their goal, is to basically say, we want to keep it competitive with what the commercial rates are, knowing that's got has to happen economically. All right, so let's get into our last section of the day, general updates. Okay. So first thing I want to talk about is our distance learning process. So you've heard us talk about this a little bit from time to time, but really we just kind of came up with this moniker, Access Anywhere to Education Everywhere. This project has been going on actually before Megan and I got involved, but basically the same grant that initially funded this whole effort, this broadband effort. A little part of it was actually, we were tasked and put in to bring video-based distance learning to a rural part of Colorado. And really, when we say distance learning, we're really focusing on this video-based one-to-one or one-to-many, where there's actual interaction with students and teachers. Historically, this has been done. You'll see like the big Cisco equipment with the big cameras and all this kind of stuff, big video conferencing. And so that's what we said, is let's bring some video conferencing to rural Colorado to see if we can get students better education, more breadth to the classes. And initially we said we're going to do 12 schools, and we're also going to look to try to create some kind of centralized classes. Because one of the problems we've realized is, I might be a school in Brush, I have no idea what classes are offered. So where is there a place where a rural school can go and say, what classes can I get to? Can I get Cherry Creek High School's chemistry class or whatever? So those are really the two main goals we had for this. And basically, it was an experiment. I mean, really, we just kind of threw it out there, said, let's do this, let's see what we learn from this. So what happened is we actually, kind of a funny thing happened on the way to the show, so to speak. We were successful. We hooked up our 12 classrooms, our 12 school districts with really expensive, fancy equipment, and did some cataloging and everything. And then all of a sudden, we kind of realized that this cloud thing was kind of morphing, and the idea of cloud-based video conferencing really took off. And actually, we discovered the product we're using right now to do this. It's called Zoom. And one of the things we realized was that initially when we put in our grant, we had three main categories of equipment. The top end was $26,000 per classroom. The middle of the line was like $12,000 a classroom. And the low end was $5,000 a classroom. It's one classroom in a school in rural part of Colorado. Now you can imagine how many rural school districts could afford $26,000 per classroom to do video conferencing. Not too many. Most of them could barely afford the $26,000 for the whole school. But that's what was out there. And all of a sudden we kind of said, hey, wait a minute. This software is actually really cheap, and all you need is a broadband connection. And what we discovered is we actually lowered the cost to about $500 for the entire school. Basically, any teacher with a laptop that's got a built-in camera can now do video conferencing. Basically, we talked about the student change in Ghana. That was fantastic. We actually had kids in Saguache, and it's the program. And about once a month, they get together with the kids in Ghana, and they sit there and they see each other, and they do different dances. They share stories about their life. They swap recipes for them to make next time they get together. They talk about what's going on in their countries. And I mean, it's amazing to see kids in Saguache County talking with kids in Ghana in real time. I mean, it's not tape delay. It is actual real time. The Denver Museum of Natural History has some things. Crow Canyon, just south of here. Literally, students can now go with archaeologists and do a dig. They've got high definition cameras they can stream over the internet through satellite. And basically, you can see an archaeologist digging right then and there, digging up dinosaur fossils. And the students can ask the archaeologist, what is that bone? What are you doing there? Literally from across the world. It's absolutely amazing. what we can do. The other big thing we discovered, and I know there was legislation last year about this, was AP classes. We're trying to get more AP classes. It's hard for rural school districts to offer AP classes because you might have 2 students in your whole school that can take an AP math class. Well, can you afford a teacher that can teach 1 class to 2 students? Probably not. And so that was one of the great things we did, is we actually have right now a teacher in Telluride. He's teaching AP English to 2 students in Brush, which is just fantastic. And the other thing is, we're starting to see communities, basically say, okay, the 4 of us can afford 1 teacher. So they put the teacher in one of the schools. That teacher basically, through this video conferencing technology, can teach at all 4 schools and offer like a Spanish class, one of the ones we did. So basically, they're sharing a Spanish teacher, and 4 schools are able to offer Spanish now because they can do this video technology. So it's really opening up the opportunities for the schools and for education for everyone.
The legal clinic, the guy who's doing legal clinics in the state uses Zoom.
Yes.
People committed to it.
Yep.
Perfect.
Yep, and that's the thing. Adult education, higher education. We've done some things with pre-college classes. We're trying to get basically CU Health Sciences Center to put together kind of like a pre-med class for high school students. So high school students that think they might want to go into the medical field, to basically be able to offer this distance learning class for high school students, so they can kind of get a flavor of what pre-med looks like before they actually jump into college and get into pre-med and then say, uh-oh, I didn't realize it was this hard. That kind of thing. So, I mean, the number of uses are just phenomenal. So the problem is our grant runs out on December 31st. So the resources that we've had to do this go away on December 31st. And what we're doing is we're really focusing on trying to identify some resources to do this. We're meeting with some legislators here soon, and that's what the white paper I sent out to everyone is basically just a summary that we're going to start sending out to stakeholders. We're going to work to engage CDE, CDHE, some of the foundations around the state. But really what we're working for is trying to find funding to keep this going. And also kind of a champion. One of the things we've realized is OYT is a technology. This is kind of half technology, half school content. Well, OYT probably shouldn't be driving content. We should be working on the technology. Someone in the education world should be driving the content and figuring out those kind of pieces. So.
University has a broadband program, $50,000 to $500,000 for rural schools.
Yeah, we looked into that, and unfortunately, it doesn't. That was more geared towards specific schools versus what we were doing. We actually we spent a lot of time looking into that program, and
we actually made a grant to the Southeast rural schools.
Yes.
Network 11 schools.
Yeah, and that unfortunately that's more for hardware and for things. It doesn't fund people. And that's, yes, it doesn't fund people. And that's really what we're looking at. So essentially, all this work has been done with 1.5 FTEs through OYT. So what we're trying to do is trying to find the funding for that 1.5 FTEs and obviously travel. Those guys have been traveling more than Megan and I do. So really what we're doing is trying to find the funding to continue those 1.5 FTEs. Some grant money for the software, because the software is like $1,000 for an unlimited license for a whole school district. Those kind of things. So there are some costs. We're trying to help out, some travel costs. What we're looking at is, we're only looking for $300,000 to $400,000 to basically keep this program going statewide.
Is that for a year?
Yes, for a whole year. So what we're trying to do, like I said, we're meeting with some legislators here soon to talk about, as the budget session comes up for next legislative session, hopefully work with CDE. But we just wanted to get this out here to you folks so that if you hear about this in the future, we're looking for support. The more support we get for something like this, the easier it is to go to legislators or go to CDE and say, look, the folks in the rural part of the state want this. This is really helping kids in the rural part of the state. So that's really what we just wanted to kind of give an overview of this program and let you folks know that we're out there looking for support. So if it comes back around, please, support this. And, this is really important to all of the communities.
Right, and there's other states that do just
Yes.
program. Are we partnering with them or talking with them of how they're funding it? What are they doing in sharing resources?
Yeah, unfortunately, most other states have a very strong centralized education network. And obviously, this state does not have a very strong centralized education network. So that's Utah. Utah actually has a good program. Idaho has a fantastic program. The problem is they have a tremendous amount of budget dedicated at the centralized Department of Education. And they basically, the State Department of Education dictates the program to everyone else. So obviously that doesn't really work in our state. So that's what we're trying to figure out, is how can we put this statewide effort, because I mean, we're not dictating anything. All we're trying to do is provide technology. But you know, like when we went to CDE, they said, well, this is fantastic, but we have no funding for this. And we have no statutory obligation or reason to do this. We can't go out and do this unless it's in our charter.
Can we not work with some of the states for private universities?
Yeah, we've talked about that. I mean, everything's on the table for us. But yeah, so unfortunately, kind of the way most states are doing it has not worked in our state, just because of, again, the decentralized nature of the way we do education in our state.
We work with some other states that have phenomenal education programs.
Oh yeah. Jerry went to Idaho, and he said they've got a budget of like $2 or $3 million a year to do what we're doing. They've got like a $2 or $3 million a year budget and like 15 FTEs dedicated. And then this is Idaho, you know, and we've got how many times the number of people, and we had 1.5 FTEs and a couple $100,000. So, yeah. Yep. Any other questions?
Yeah, I wanted to mention something that a couple of years ago, I was working with some of the southeastern rural schools, and I had received a fairly large National Science Foundation grant, and I was working for CSU Pueblo.
Mhm.
And so a lot of the teachers who needed to get some credits and, you know, to recertify, they could take my course, and several courses actually. And that was, you know, the National Science Foundation, that's exactly what they like to fund. It was, of course, science and math, but, you know, I mean, that would be probably a really good source if you would work with some of the universities or colleges, you know, who have that expertise.
Yeah, and we have. We've been working. We've been doing. I think we actually have worked with CSU Pueblo. We worked with CU Colorado Springs. We've done some good work with CSU Fort Collins and CU Boulder on doing things. So yeah, we're seeing a lot of this activity at the higher ed level because of their model of students being anywhere. And so we're just trying to figure out how to do this in a K-12. But you know, like I said, we're looking for support for anywhere. So if it's higher ed that kind of champions this, hey, that's great. So. Okay, Broadband Fund and Board. So I just wanted to kind of give an update to everyone on the Broadband Fund and Board. I think that basically this is the statutes that were passed back in last session, the telecom and broadband reform. Basically right now, actually that's not 3, it's 2. So we're waiting on 2 seats. So there's 16 folks on this Broadband Board. 14 of them have been identified and nominated. We're waiting on 2 nominations coming from one of the legislators over at the Capitol, who is, you know, I think if everyone doesn't know, basically, you know, the governor appointed like 6 folks, the House Minority Leader appointed 2, the House Majority Leader appointed 2, the Senate, I mean, it was all over the board. So we're waiting on a couple of nominations from legislative folks, but we are, I think, working on getting, I was just talking to some folks, setting up the initial meeting, basically kind of saying, okay, we're not going to wait. We're just going to go forward with a meeting, and you know, hopefully those 2 spots will get nominated. So we're putting together contact information on this. So hopefully we'll get the board moving quickly and schedule a first meeting. The reason we want to get this board going now, even before there's money in there, is because there's a lot of work to be done. This board has to figure out what's the application process, what's the challenge process, what are the audit procedures to make sure the money goes out, how do we give money out, how much money do we give out, all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of work to be done. So we want to get the board up and running and working so that once there is money in the broadband fund, that it can get out the door very quickly. So that's one of the reasons we want to do that. So we're working with Dora and PUC to kind of schedule this initial meeting for the board. In terms of funding status, you know, basically the way the legislation was set up was that it said any monies not needed in the high cost support mechanism for voice, for traditional voice, would move over to broadband. There's a whole slew of ways to do that, and I think, let me see here, I think this next slide. Yes, so basically what it said is money that is not needed for voice anymore can go to broadband. So to determine whether or not that money is needed for voice or not, there's a whole slew of processes and procedures the PUC has to go through with the folks that currently get the high cost fund. Most of the high cost fund goes to CenturyLink, but there are some smaller rural incumbents that do get that as well. So basically there's this big process, and you know, 45 days notice here and a hearing here, and defining this and defining that the PUC has to go through. There's no way really to usurp it. So it's this process to go through to determine, is there any money left over? And what the focus of this is effectively competitive areas. Because basically what's happening is what the law says in areas that are determined competitive. So that means there's multiple options, so that there's no longer a need to subsidize one carrier because there's a whole bunch of carriers, whether that's wireless or wireline or cable or whatever. Those areas will no longer get money for this high cost one. So that's what we're essentially going through, is this process of figuring out where's the competitive area, where's the need, and is there money in it. So hopefully we'll know in the next few months if there's going to be any money at all in this current year from high cost, any savings to go into broadband. We don't know that number could be zero, that number could be a couple million, or anywhere in between. We have no idea. So, just want to let everyone know that they're working on that. I know Lynn, the PC, is working diligently on trying to move that process as fast as she can. But there's just certain things that, it's one of those, once the process goes, it goes. So that's where we're at with the high cost fund and the broadband fund. Any questions on the broadband fund board? A lot of the folks that are involved in this room, David, I know he's on the broadband board. Who else? Myself is on there. Yeah, I'm sorry. I knew Ed is on there. Mike Nelson from Comcast, Roberta, who's on the phone from AT&T. So it's based on what I've seen. It's a very good board. It's everyone on the board so far is knowledgeable of this and has been engaged in this conversation. And so I'm very pleased with the level of candidate that's been on here. So I think we'll make some good things happen. Once we can figure out where the money's going to come from. So. Yes, yeah.
From earlier presentations, I recall something like it's currently $52 to $54 million lives in that fund, all of it dedicated to voice.
Yes.
With the new legislation, what are the totals?
The total fund cannot increase. That was so basically there was a deal made, a legislative deal made several years ago that capped the high cost fund at $54 million. So the high cost fund cannot go more than $54 million. Now, the key question is what part of that $54 million goes to voice or not? So anything less than 54 that doesn't, if only 52 is needed for voice, then 2 million goes to broadband. If only 50 million is needed for voice, then 10 million goes to broadband. So what they're trying to do now is figure out what is that voice, because the problem was that there was more need when they struck that deal to say $54 million. Is what it's capped at. There was actually more need than $54 million, but that was just part of the deal. So that's part of what they're trying to work through, is that even though it's capped at 54, the demand from voice side was more than $54 million. So even though they've taken some areas out right now and said, okay, these areas are competitive, we're not going to put any money into these areas anymore. Well, there was other areas that were in need of money too. So that's why there's a chance that there may not be any funds for this current year.
Who's doing this analysis, and when are the results?
The PUC manages the high cost fund. Like I said, they're working as fast as they can to do this. Part of it's procedural. Essentially, the carriers that collect the high cost fund, basically, they can choose to challenge a procedure or not challenge a procedure or do this or do that. The PUC has no sway over whether they do that or not. It's up to them. So that's really the timeline is it's hopefully by the end of the year, by October, November, we should have some idea of what it looks like for this year. And I know the PUC does their budgeting in October for the next year's high cost fund. So we should have a little bit more knowledge in the October, November timeframe.
Is there a cap on the amount that can be applied to broadband in year 1, 2, 3, 4?
No, there's no cap on what goes into broadband. Really, the key is what is needed for voice. Yes.
Anybody making any effort to, promote to rural areas about the fact that we might be better off with broadband? And because when that letter came out last year, everybody in the county, I think except me, said, oh, absolutely, we must keep it all with voice. You can't take any of that away. And my question was, maybe it ought to be somewhere else. And so there's been I haven't heard a lot of conversation about how you make that choice. They just all said, we're small, they're stealing our money, we're small, we need money. At least that was my sense, pretty unsophisticated.
No, it is, I mean, that essentially is the crux of it. It is at some point, that there are people that still rely on their traditional telephone lines in some very high cost areas. And so how do you balance that need between kind of moving forward and holding on to the past, so to speak? That's, I think, an important discussion. I think,
We certainly have areas that have never had telephone lines out.
yes, if you, and I think that's a valuable point to bring up to your elected officials, your local elected officials and your state representatives, is this going to work? The mechanism that was put in place with the legislation, is it really going to work? We thought it was going to work. It might still work. If it doesn't work, what's an alternative to make that happen? Because there are still people that will say, yes, we need money in the voice. So that's part of the debate. So
I think we get back to the definition of we're talking about applications instead of infrastructure. And I think that we need to get away from what's on the pipe or what's on the satellite or what's on the line and start supporting the infrastructure that's going to provide a robust service in the future. So, and that's a hard sell. You have a lot of folks on each end of the spectrum. Some are working to protect the voice side because there's jobs there. And there's others that are advocating for the broadband side because there's revenues there. So it is a balance that we have to. I think that's going to be our biggest challenge is trying to get that definition of what's going to be supported. So at the FCC level, needing to trickle down to the state level, that mentality of this money is for voice. To provide voice services. So it's going to be challenging.
any questions about the broadband fund or the broadband board? Folks on the phone? Okay. Okay. FCC program. Been a lot of activity on this one recently. The FCC, to summarize, there was some money left over from the Connect America Fund 1 program, which is essentially the movement of the service fund away from voice to broadband. This essentially was monies that the incumbent carriers across the country initially said, no, we don't want them because of the strings attached to the money. So the FCC kind of said, hey, well, what should we do with this leftover money? One of the things they came up with was an idea of doing these rural experiments. At the same time all this is going on, AT&T, the traditional voice company, basically went to the FCC and said, you know what? We don't think we should need to support the traditional public switch telephone network anymore. It is costing us $1 gazillion to support antiquated technology, and we think we'd be better off as a country just moving away from voice and going to broadband. And I think a lot of folks agree with that, but the problem is how. So the FCC said, well, to do this, we're going to have to get broadband in the rural parts of the state or the country because the rural parts of the country have voice. And so how are we going to do that? How are we going to get reliable broadband service to where we could turn off the voice services in rural parts of the country? So they said, well, we've got this money left over. Let's try doing some experiments. So they basically threw a program out and said, we're going to fund some experiments for people that are willing to provide high capacity, robust broadband service in rural parts of the country, and you have to offer a basic voice service. So just like you can get a voice service from a Comcast or something along with your cable. It's not traditional voice; it's basically voice over IP. Same kind of thing. This is some pretty robust minimum standards: 25 down and 5 up for the rural parts of the country. And they said what we're going to do is follow the same model, so that there's Connect America Fund 2, which is basically the next phase where the traditional incumbents, think the old baby bells, basically get the first crack at the money, and then any money left over is going to go into the process. They said let's kind of see how this might work. So there's $100 million available. The FCC defined where this money is available by. Basically, what they did is they used the same model that the Connect America Fund 2 is based on, which is unserved, 3 down and 1 up. So basically, anything that does not have 3 down and 1 up is considered unserved. And they do it by census block, and they identify in each census block how many locations are unserved. And then they basically have this complex model that says this is how much money we would give to a company to serve this area. So they broke this down into what census block, and they basically said, okay, if you're in one of these census blocks, here's some money that you could have access to by census block over the next 10 years for this program. So basically, if you apply money, you're going to get a check in the mail every month for the next 10 years. But you have to commit to providing broadband service at this very high threshold with a voice component to all the people in this census block. The other thing about this program is it's really going to be a model for the Connect America Fund 2. Because with the Connect America Fund 2, one of the things that happens is the incumbent of any state. So in our state, CenturyLink is the primary incumbent. So the FCC will offer CenturyLink a set amount of money and say, okay, are you willing to serve all the locations identified in this state for this amount of money? Take it or leave it. And CenturyLink has to take the entire state or nothing. They can't say we'll take this area or this area. So what's anticipated is that some of the states, the incumbents will take the money. Some of the states, the incumbents will not take the money. So the money that's not taken, again, goes back into this reverse auction process, where they're going to say, okay, now that the incumbent has had the chance to take the money, we're going to open it up, and we're not going to do it by state, we're going to do it by census block, and anyone can come back in and offer to serve this area for a set amount of money, including the incumbent. So essentially, if CenturyLink turns down the state as a whole, and we go into this big pot of money where anyone can bid, CenturyLink can come back in and bid on certain areas, just like you could, David could come in and bid on certain areas. So that's really what this process has done. The FCC really set where this money is, where it's not. One of the important things to know is this program is only available in what's called price cap. So there's two ways that phone companies have been regulated traditionally. Price cap carriers are your traditional incumbents. Think your old BB Bells. Basically, it's what it sounds like. They cap the price that they can charge people, and then basically said, we'll help subsidize, the cost that way. The other is called rate of return. So the smaller folks, a lot of them on the Eastern Plains, your small rural co-ops and so forth, they're what's called rate of return carriers, where it's they set the rate of what they don't cap what can be charged, but they kind of set what the profit margin is, so to speak, on those carriers. Those are managed differently. This program is only in price cap carriers. So if you've got a traditional rural phone co-op in your area, that's why that area was not included in you'll see in the map some of these huge swaths of land where there's no availability. That's because that's served by a rate of return carrier. And this program is only for price cap areas. That said, the FCC has said, I think David might have some input on this, but that they're working on a program for rate of return. They've been working on a program for several years now. I don't know how close they are, but so that's part of the issue here. So we've been working with folks to try to really sit down. What we've been focusing on is face-to-face meetings, help people understand what this money is, how much is available, why it's not available, what it means, where the census blocks are. Megan worked to map all the areas where you can actually, we've got some maps, you can go in and see exactly how many locations are there, what the funding is, and really help them understand the program. We're heading down to Durango on Monday to work with some folks there in the southwest part of the state to kind of put together an idea of what this might look like. We've offered up to really, be part of the process. That said, it's going to have to be a local carrier or a larger carrier. Some kind of carrier that's going to put this forward. They encourage consortiums, they encourage partnerships, they encourage new technologies, they encourage wireless, they encourage hybrid technologies. They really are interested in figuring out how the heck do we solve this problem. To me, overall, it's a good program. Could they have distributed the money a little bit differently? Probably. But they'll learn. Overall, I think it's a good chance to do it. So hopefully we'll have a few folks that apply for these funds. It is going to be very, very competitive. Everyone recalls there was the letters of interest they received back in January. I worked with everyone on. So they added it up. There was $14 billion of interest in this. Basically all the letters of interest added up to $14 billion, and they're throwing out $100 million. So that's your proverbial drop in the bucket. That said, it's anticipated that there will be a lot more money in CAF 2. I think a lot of folks anticipate a lot of the incumbents will not take the money for CAF 2 because there's a lot of strings attached. And to basically say we're going to serve the entire state, it's a big challenge in some of these states, especially out west here. So I think it's anticipated that there's going to be a lot more money left over in CAF 2, and the process is going to look the exact same. So if you go through this process and you don't get the money, you know, it could be time well spent, because the process a year from now, we'll probably be here looking at the same thing, hopefully with a lot more money on the table, but the process is going to be very, very similar to what you're seeing. So,
Brian, the strings attached to CAF 2, I understand they're being negotiated, or some of the incumbents are trying to negotiate those strings. Is that?
Yeah, that's my understanding, that the incumbents nationwide are working with the FCC to kind of figure out what those strings are, what the requirements are, things like the build-out requirements. You know, if they commit, you know, one of the big steps the FCC is taking is they basically thrown out, initially when this whole thing went in place, the definition of broadband was 4 down and 1 up. So all the incumbents would have to build to 4 down and 1 up. Well, the FCC has been pretty open and said, we think it should be 10 down and 1 up. So if they do that, then these incumbents would have to build 10 down and 1 up across the entire state. And there's also building thresholds. So, you know, right now it says you have to be built out in 3 years. You know, so that's some of the things I think the incumbents, again, across the country are saying is, well, if you're going to do it, if you're going to push the 10 down, you know, give us all 10 years of the program to get to that 10 down and 1 up versus 3 years. So, they're working on that. At the same thing, the amount of money. You know, I think a lot of the states, there's a threshold about what that money is, so they are trying to figure out the FCC. I'm not privy to those conversations. I don't know, but I believe those conversations have to be wrapped up in the next month or two. And everything is, I think by October, November, everything is going to be set. And it'll be time for the incumbents to say, yes, we'll take the money from the state, or no, we're not going to take the money from the state. So.
Trying to take into consideration, given the number of households or parcels served within a census block, one of the issues about rural areas is that 5% of the properties might have service, and that disqualifies the entire census block because it's now defined as served.
Yeah, no, that actually, that's one of the benefits of this. What they did with this program is when they went to a census block, they identified the total number of locations. Then they identified the number of unserved locations and the number of high-cost locations. So they did actually break that down. So they said this census block has 200 homes. 50 of them are served. So there's 150 homes eligible for this, you know, that are unserved. How much money would it, you know, and they have this model that determines how much money per location would you get for those 150 homes. So they did take some steps with that. If you accept the money, that's one of the strings though. If you accept this money, you have to commit to offering for all 200 homes. So even if 50 of them are served by somebody else and happy with their service, you have to commit to saying, I will commit to serving those folks, even if they, you know, if they want my service. But you're only going to get the money for the ones that are unserved. So that it's kind of a, you know, chicken and the egg, you know, it's an opportunity for you to go for more business, but you're not guaranteed that business. So that, you know, when people apply, they have to kind of take that into account. But no, they did make some steps into actually breaking it down within the census block. So that's one of the positives.
Well, sure, you're offering the service, but say I'm not going to pay that price. Is the criteria to offer the service, make it available, or do you actually have a customer?
To the areas that you have to commit to offering the service at a reasonable price, you know, to everyone in that census block. So yeah, so you can't take the money and then charge $200 a month for, you know, per line. You know, so you have to charge comparable to what's metropolitan rates, what I pay in Denver. But yeah, you have to offer the service to everyone. But you're getting that's where you're getting the subsidy. That's essentially what's happening is they're saying, okay, you tell us what, you know, knowing that you can only charge a certain, you know, general rate, it's like $50 a month, what people in Denver pay. You know, and you've got 200 lines here. Okay, what's that revenue? We know the cost is more. That's what they're doing is they're saying, we're willing to give you X amount of money from the government to make up that difference. And with this process, what they're hoping is basically a reverse auction. So they're saying, hopefully someone will come in and say, well, there's $100,000 in the census block available. I only need $80,000 to do that. And then another carrier may come in and say, I can do it for $60,000. And essentially, whoever is the cheapest will get the money. So yeah, that's kind of the thought is to, again, subsidize that ongoing cost to say, what's the difference between what you can charge versus what it's actually going to cost.
Right, one huge caveat on those broadband experiments, that if you apply for the money and you're awarded the money for these unserved areas in the broadband, part of the broadband experiments, you must become an eligible telecommunications carrier, which is an ETC, which means you're 100% regulated for that portion of the network.
Well, actually, but there's an exemption that you're not regulated in the same fashion. So people have to do ETC for this program. It doesn't mean your company is regulated. The voice, it basically says the voice portion, yeah. So basically what happens is thank you, Dave, for pointing that out. So yeah, so there's a regulatory structure that you have to abide by. Basically, the problem is that to get Universal Service Fund money, you have to be an eligible telecommunications carrier. And what Dave goes back to, it's about voice. So legally they can't get around giving anyone money that's not that. So what they're saying is apply for it. You don't have to be one now, but if you do get the money, you've got 90 days to be certified. I've talked to the PUC. It's not a complicated process to get certified. The PUC has said they'll work with us on anyone that does get the money that needs this done. And basically what that means is your voice component, you'll have to basically live with the same requirements in terms of uptime and consumer complaints, all the private last resort for the voice components, not for the broadband components, just for the voice components. So there are some things to think about there. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up. Other questions about the FCC?
Brian Carroll with Colorado Central Telecom. Just want to clarify a couple of things. You have to offer, say, 25 and 5, but obviously the consumer doesn't have to purchase 25 and 5, correct? That's question one. And question two is if I apply for an area that has 200 available market there, but only 50 people sign up, we're only going to get paid the prorated portion for those 50?
No, okay, so you answer your first question, I believe, is yes. So on the second part, no, you apply for amount of money. Basically, you say, okay, it's gonna cost me X amount of money to serve this area. So the money you get from the program won't change based on the number of customers you have.
Okay.
The number of customers you have affects that amount, and you have a take rate, and you would factor in, my monthly fee I can charge these folks plus the government money I get would, get me a profit. Now, the government money you get is not going to change, but obviously if you only get half the customers you thought you would, that's an issue from your revenue standpoint. So you have to factor that in. So yeah, but no, the amount of money you would get from the FCC is not dependent on the number of people who actually sign up for your service.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? All right, well, that's the end of our formal presentation. I would draw that. Is there any other questions people have? Anything, any specific program or issue they're curious about? Open it up to the floor. I know we got here a little early. Is there any questions on other issues, general issues, updates?
Do you have a target date and time for the next one of these?
We're looking at December. We were thinking Eastern Plains somewhere, but we will get back with you. I'm sorry?
Lyman maybe?
I'm not sure. We hadn't thought that far. Yeah, again, our thought was to do one on the western slope. Obviously, Mountain Connect will be on the western slope. One on the Eastern Plains. One kind of in the southern area of the state, and then again one in the metropolitan area. So that was our initial thought, was to kind of circle the states. We're open, if something else makes sense, we're open. But that was kind of our initial thought. So and obviously we have to consider winter. Yeah, well, that's why we were thinking early December, because we figured most of the blizzards hit later in the season, so we figured we'd still be safe in early December heading out to the plains. And then for March, we thought about it might make sense to come down with legislative session and give everyone a chance to talk about that kind of stuff. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and we'll get that all figured out relatively soon, so you guys can get it on your calendar. I know this one was planned pretty quickly, so thank you all for coming. And if you didn't get my emails, let me know and I can add you to the list. If you had it forwarded.
Yeah, the attendees or spot on the website where everybody can put in their contact information. So if somebody has a question, they can go in and say, hey, has anybody looked at this in regards to telehealth? And kind of as a sharing as a blog, so that people can start sharing that information.
We talked about that. We have to, Megan's web development skills were tapped out when we developed the broadband portal, but we've since determined we have actual internal web developers that's their job at OIT. So we're really excited about that. To get that. So yeah, we're working on, because those are all the things that we want to do with the broadband portal. That we initially had, we were going to go outside OIT consulting help to do that. Our purchasing process was interesting, and Megan and I had an educational experience with that. So we basically had to put it together with what Megan knew about web development, and she did an excellent job. But yeah, there's a lot of things like that, the interactive piece that we want to do, that we're gonna start working with our internal resources to get that done.
In the interim, can we do a list?
Yeah, I can put together a list. I think I have most of your emails, as far as I know. So if you haven't gotten my emails, please let me know and I can add you to the list. And I have a list of everyone who's here today, so.
All right, well, thank you everyone for spending your afternoon with us. We really appreciate it. Hopefully you found this useful. We'll send out a big debrief. I think lots of notes about stuff, so be looking for more information. Thank you.
It is, it got really.
We'll have to get some feedback on that. Building's nice. Great team.
Next year. I won't be there, but we have better air circulation and nothing. I called our.
Kathleen, you may have tried.
He said that one's never worked. They want to sign up. They tried hard to make it.
Yeah, and then it's a new spot, so. And I'm assuming your email. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, these emails get forwarded and then I don't have all the contact info, so. Thanks for coming.
I haven't seen enough
Library tomorrow, and I will show her.